You're watching Behind the Label. I'm Lowell with Elgray Photography.
I'm Jerry with Stone Fences Tours.
And you're joining us as we are set here in the beautiful Ripy mansion. If you looked at our last episode, you can tell that we're still on the old Ripy.
Yeah, it's kind of an intro to the Ripy family, the start of the Ripy family. We went through James and actually got to his son TB, one of his two sons.
And before we move past that, I want to make kind of a note. As I was photographing the bottle, actually on the bottle there's a silhouette of James and his wife,
Artemisia.
Say
that 3 times fast,
which is a kind of a sort of cool name, I guess. I don't know. It almost sounds like a Greek goddess, but it's actually kind of cool. But supposedly these are legit silhouettes of.
Supposedly,
it's historically is what they say. But if you ever get a chance, definitely I have plans to hopefully get a bottle of this.
Oh yeah, if you can, because this bottle was actually part of the proceeds from this bottle actually went to this house.
Right.
So we'll talk about how they got to use this label and everything when we talk about the house. But
so we left off last time we were at James, who came over from County Tyrone, had a very short stint in the distillery business, basically 1 year. Was at his distillery, which was on the river, which is about 5 miles east of here. Sold that then to his son. And his son was?
Thomas B.B. Ripy.
TB
Ripy. Yeah, it's easier to say than Thomas B.B. Ripy. Sold it to him. Like I said, he was 22 years old. And what does he do? He tears down that distillery and builds a new one, which he does this multiple times.
But he does it in the same location.
Same location, yes. Yeah, and we've got some footage, like I said, from a drone where we'll show you that little, that location. He builds a distillery there. It's called multiple names. Some people call it the TB Ripy Distillery. Some people call it the Anderson County Sour Mash Distillery.
I did see that on one of your slides.
Yeah, and most people know it as the Cliff Springs Distillery, and it's set right on the river, right on the Kentucky River, which was a good spot to put a distillery for.
The reason it was such a good spot, and originally that little area, it's now called Tyrone, but the Rippies actually named it Tyrone because they're honored County Tyrone. But the reason it was such a good spot, and it was called originally Steamville, is because the Kentucky River feeds directly into the Ohio River, which feeds directly into the Mississippi River, which of course goes to New Orleans, and that gets you to the world. So when you have a distillery in Anderson County, Kentucky on the river, you're only yards away from the rest of the world in a literal sense. Once you get it on the barge, it's just a round trip and it goes anywhere it wants. So they were well positioned, and from what I've learned, TB was definitely an entrepreneur.
He was a businessman.
He kind of had that vision to know that where he stood.
Yeah, he actually, one thing I forgot to mention is that he actually, when he purchased that distillery from his dad and his dad's partners, well, he had a partner himself, a very well-known man here in Lawrenceburg, Judge McBrayer.
Yeah, and I would ask Jerry, is this guy a real judge? Because it's sort of like you hear people, Colonel, Colonel Flanders, that sort of thing. You're like, I'm not sure if they're real, but apparently he was an actual real judge. I'm not sure what kind of judge he was.
He was a great distiller. His distillery, which we'll talk about in a future episode when we talk about the Lawrenceburg families, Cedarbrook was one of the best bourbons in the country in the late 1800s. But TB was a wheeler dealer, and he actually bought him out the very next year. So he has this distillery on his own. And then in the early 1880s, he goes in with a partnership to build another distillery just south of the Cliff Springs, a few hundred yards south, called Clover Bottom.
A little farther from the river, but still very much within walking distance of the other distillery. So it's, again, if you're not familiar with here, it's sort of just a flat area that sort of overlooks the river, a flat area of land, and he basically controlled that whole area.
He did, yeah. And of course, about 4 years later, he bought those partners out. So he has 2 huge distilleries. And also during this time, he's buying other distilleries, selling them, and becoming partners. Different things. He was in partnership with a handful of other distilleries in Anderson County.
Yeah. In fact, he was such a wheeler dealer that at that time he eventually became the largest independent distiller in the entire world. Not just the United States, but the entire world.
The world. I mean, he had money, and you could tell.
Yeah, you can tell.
If you ever come to this house and take a tour, he had some money, and we suggest you do that. But no, he did well. He did well, and he had his ups and downs. Most people at that time, talk about Colonel Taylor. There were times he had to sell distilleries because he didn't have the money. He went too much, too in deep with loans and everything. So, but he had his up and down. But this was at his peak, I would say, right here in the late 1880s.
Right.
And he eventually, in the late 1890s, starts becoming health problems, and he actually sells one of the distilleries to what's called the Whiskey Trust. And that'll be an episode we'll do later.
Yeah.
And he sold that in 1899. So he sells Cliff Springs in 1899. He sells Clover Bottom the very next year to the Whiskey Trust.
And you would think that maybe that's the end of the Ripy story.
No.
That's sort of done. But
No, he had a brother, James P.,
Yep.
the other brother. And one thing about both these brothers is kind of, if you're a Civil War fan, they both fought in the Civil War on the Confederate side.
on the Confederate side.
Yeah, James P. actually rode with John Hunt Morgan.
Yeah.
So, I mean, James P., he actually didn't get into the business for quite a while. He was the older brother of TB. He's a few years older. He actually purchases an old distillery, the old Stevens Distillery, sitting up on a hill overlooking the Kentucky River.
Yeah. But you're still talking about in a geographic circumference, maybe 3 miles, 4 miles.
Well, you can see when we were at the river today, you can actually see from where Cliff Springs Distillery was
Right.
to where the
To the
location.
top of the hill, yes.
Yeah, it's called Old Hickory Springs Distillery.
So now you have two Ripy brothers
Mm-hmm.
with, well, he doesn't, at this point now, he doesn't have his 2 distilleries that he sold to the trust.
Yeah, well, this 1880s when James P. got into it. So at the time, that's when TV was at his peak, and James has this distillery.
So at that
also.
time, they actually did, the
Yeah.
Ripys did have actually 3 distilleries under their control.
And James P. actually had another smaller distillery too.
Okay.
So they had multiple distilleries. The 2 brothers did. Like I said, TB passes away in 1902. He's young when he passed away. He's only he's born in 47, so he's pretty young when he passes away. James still has that distillery overlooking the Kentucky River. He actually, TB's sons, he has a bunch of sons. He has a big family. He has like 10 kids that live to adulthood. Most of them were boys.
TB does.
TB does.
Yeah.
Yes. And most of them go into the whiskey business.
And rightfully so.
Yes.
It seems pretty profitable at that point.
It does. And some of those brothers, Ernest and EF, and there's like 3 or 4 of those brothers got together and actually took over the Old Hickory Springs Distillery overlooking the Kentucky River.
Up on the cliffs, like we were
Up on the cliffs, yes.
Now, just as an aside, there must have been a huge production of whiskey. That's 3 major distilleries within just literally sometimes yards, a couple miles of each other. Where is most of that whiskey going? Is it going to be sold regionally? Is it going on the river and going down?
Most of it's going down the river.
Going down the river. So you're
Yes.
ending up more like a New Orleans type. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of it's going down the river. Like I said, the brothers, they take over that distillery, and it's called, and by 1905, it's called the Ripy Brothers Distillery.
And now this is the one that's on the cliff. That's up overlooking.
It is. It is up overlooking the river. It's there's a more well-known name to it, and we'll talk about that in a
we'll
minute.
get to that.
We'll talk about that in a minute. So they take over that distillery, and it's a beautiful site up there. It's one of the most popular destinations for people to go and see the view.
Yeah, the view is pretty amazing, and they actually have, when we get to it, the other little landmark there is the railroad trestle. I'm not sure when the railroad was originally
Early
built.
1900s.
Yeah, I didn't think it's around in the 80s
Early 1900s.
or 1880s. So I'm not sure. Was the railroad itself ever used as a shipment method for bourbon, or has it always been river traffic?
No, I'm sure a lot of them switched to railroads when they came along.
Okay.
It's quicker.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
I was
it's
thinking
quicker. So a lot of
and
them.
especially since it's literally right on the top of the hill from their distilleries. It's sort of between the groups of distilleries. I would think they would use it, but
Yeah. So that's, we got the Ripy brothers. Like I said, there were multiple ones of them. They all got into the whiskey business some way or somehow. And
so that was 4 sons of TB that got.
well, it's like 3 of them, but there were more of them that worked there. But they controlled the distillery. They owned the distillery. So some of the younger ones came along and worked at the distillery and all that. So it's just a great story. And what'd you think of that?
I loved it. Yeah, definitely. I don't want to use up all of this whiskey.
Yeah, Rick, we'll have this back to you safely. It's
the bottle.
It's been photographed a few times, so we do have that. All All right. So
No, I really like it. That is, it's, you can definitely tell it's it's of the wild turkey lineage, but definitely smoother. So I would highly recommend it. If nothing else, just for the bottle, because the bottle photographed beautifully. I like it. It's a good whiskey, especially again for rainy, cold days. For me, it seems like more of a winter whiskey.
Okay. So we're at the Ripy Brothers, and we'll come back to that in our next episode.
See you then.
Took a sip, man, what a trip. But things started making sense. Now I'm seeing clear, chugging down